Welcome to the Enterprise Architecture Radio. Did you know that after spending decades of hard work and research, after investing billions of dollars, 9 out of 10 new medicines that pharmaceutical industries work on are a failure? Yes, we're talking about a 90% failure rate. And this is because every new drug that has the potential to become a product has to go through a long and enduring journey that involves two parts to it. One is preclinical trial and one is clinical trial. And so much so that they are called the valley of death and the highest mountain that science has ever seen. So valley of death because the journey is so treacherous that a large number of drugs that are identified as cures to diseases get rejected in the preclinical trials. That's why the valley of death. And the clinical trials are so difficult that they're called the highest mountains science has ever seen. So what's the primary difference between preclinical trials and clinical trials, right? Preclinical trials are the studies that we do before we start testing the drug on humans. There are two types of studies that are done. It's called in vitro studies and in vivo studies. In vitro means that we study that particular compound or a molecule and its effects in a petri dish, in a laboratory environment, in a test tube, right? We don't really use it in live things, right? And in vivo studies are studies in which we use animal models. So, we use animals to do our studies. In vivo studies involve that we, from the case to case, on a case to case basis, obviously, involve inducing a particular ailment into an animal and then administering the drug and seeing the safety and the efficacy of the drug on that animal. There are things that we look at, 4 primary things that we look at in preclinical trial studies. We look at safety, obviously, whether the medicine is safe for human beings to take it. We look at efficacy, whether the medicine is actually effective and whether it does what we are hoping it'll do. We look at pharmacokinetics. Pharmacokinetics is the movement of the medicine. So we look at absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, and toxicity of the drug, right? Absorption essentially means once we've administered the drug, how does it get absorbed? Distribution means does it get to the tissues where it's expected to go, right? Metabolism means how does it metabolize? Does it do what it's supposed to do? What are we really expecting it to do? Excretion, how does it, once it's done its job, it's lived its life inside the human body, how is it excreted out of the body? And toxicity, whether it's toxic or not, which again leads us back to safety, right? And then finally, pharmacodynamics. Pharmacodynamics is the efficacy of the drug or toxicity or adverse effects, right? So we look at all of this in preclinical trials. Now it's called the valley of death because majority of the medicines that go into preclinical trials do not survive it, right? When we find out that it's either too toxic or it has too many adverse effects or it's not efficacious and so on and so forth, or we submit the results to this regulatory bodies and the regulatory bodies find it not very safe for human consumption, right? So majority of them are rejected or are considered to be a failure. So what can we really do to improve this? Because ultimately this podcast is about how technology can enable this, right? How can technology enable pharmaceutical companies to improve the situation? Because one thing is for sure, that majority of the medicines that will go into preclinical trials will fail, right? 9 out of 10, 90%. Very few companies, you might get lucky, find a few hits early, but majority of them usually fail, and that's the historical data. And technology can't, at this point in time, I can't think of any way that technology can really improve that hit rate. But it can improve the turnaround times. So we've been doing these experimental research on, in vitro studies and in vivo studies for many, many years now, and we've got all this data. What is potentially possible is we give all of this biological and molecular data to an artificial intelligence system. And since the system now knows how each molecule or compound impacts a particular protein, and if you remember, we talked about protein folding and what a medicine really is. Protein folding is every protein tries to fold and do a job, either carry something or it's some sort of a sensor that receives signals or what have you. And what we really do is we come up with compounds and molecules, either synthetic or natural, that attaches itself to this particular protein, changes its behavior, kills it, makes it live longer, or makes our body healthier, right? The computers already know a large amount of that data is already available to it, right? Based on this, it can already simulate how compounds will impact proteins, right? So you don't really have to go through the long and enduring process of testing out each cure or testing out each medicine and then finding out that it's not going to work. You can simulate that and you can filter out a large number of compounds that are potentially going to fail, right? You've simulated it, the computer itself says these are a failure, let's not even test it, okay? And then you are left out with a filtered set, which is a much smaller set, and then those you can do in vitro and in vivo studies, right? When you do that, your turnaround times get faster. In fact, your hit rate might also get improved, right? Because now you have already eliminated a large chunk of compounds that would have potentially failed. This is called fail fast and fail cheap, right? There is also the matter of ethical concern where, basically reduces the animal testing, right? Because now that you have already filtered out a large number of molecules that were eventually going to fail, you're not doing all of that testing on animals, which means there is a higher chance that the medicine that we are actually testing on the animals will not fail, or the probability of its success increases a little bit, right? So there are those ethical concerns as well. And then even if we don't consider the ethical concerns, there's a large amount of money that can be saved, because now all those tests that we were actually going to do physically are not required. All the failed tests have been filtered out and we focus on results better. So, so that's how technology and artificial intelligence and systems can actually reduce the amount of time that it takes for preclinical trials. So we spend less amount of time in the valley of death and move into the highest mountain that science has ever seen, which is clinical trials. At this point in time, I would like to remind you that if you're enjoying the videos that you're watching on Enterprise Architecture Radio, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe and do all the good stuff. You know what to do. And comment. Let me know what you think. If there are things that I can do to improve these videos, then please let me know and I will see what I can do. So now, in clinical trials, which is the highest mountain science has ever seen, it's called this because it's very difficult, right? One of the biggest challenges that pharmaceutical companies face in clinical trials is finding the right patients, right? Because we are working with human beings. Human beings need to volunteer to participate in a particular, drug test, essentially, and it's an experimental drug. So why do these patients really volunteer? Why do they want to come and participate in a drug test? Well, there are n number of reasons. One of the reasons could be that they already have a life-threatening ailment or a disease. There is no cure at this point in time, and basically they volunteer with the hope that this experimental drug will work and might extend their life or what have you. But I'll not go into the reasons. One is to find people who would volunteer, because not every drug is a cure to a life-threatening disease. It could be a cure to simple things like painkillers, right, or something else. So it's difficult, right? It's difficult to find volunteers. But more importantly, even if you do find volunteers, right, not every volunteer might be the best, most suitable subject for a drug test. Same kind of ailment, multiple people, only a few are a good test subject. For various reasons, what kind of food you have, what kind of other diseases that you have, what kind of other medications that you're taking which might interfere with the test or what have you. Now, when you have an artificial intelligence system, if you feed it all the biological data of all the patients that all the data that is available to you of patients, it can very easily look at the biological markers, and it can look at the properties of the, of the disease, of the ailment that you're trying to cure. It can look at the compounds that we are going to be working with. It can look at all the interactions, and based on that, filter out the patients that are not really a very good subject for the test. It becomes a lot easier for us to identify the right kind of patients for the drug test. But it's not just that. There is more. There are ethical concerns as well. Okay, there's something called a double-blind study, right? To be able to truly test a drug on patients, you need to split the volunteers into two groups. One group gets the medicine, the other group is called a control group that does not get the medicine but gets a placebo. Now, they don't know who's getting the medicine and who's getting the placebo. In fact, the double-blind studies are such that nobody really knows who's getting the medicine and who's getting the placebo. The patients don't know, obviously. Even the doctors don't know. Only the systems know. The system gets to decide, and this also eliminates to a certain extent the ethical dilemma of who gets to decide who's going to get the medicine and who's going to get the placebo. And so what the system does is it randomly splits the volunteers into two groups. One group gets the medicine, the other group is a control group. But even then there is an ethical concern. The concern is that now the patients have all signed a consent form where they have been informed that there is a 50% probability that they may get the medicine or they are not going to get the medicine, right? There's a 50% chance that they will not get a medicine, okay? And there is only a 50% chance that they will get a medicine, and nobody knows whether they'll get the medicine or not, right? They know that. But I still think that there is an ethical concern. After all, the patients have volunteered, if it is a life-threatening disease or, a serious critical illness, with the hope that they are going to get the medicine. But what ends up happening is that they are not getting the medicine. That's one. Second is that already the pharmaceutical company has less number of patients. Now you've got to split it into two parts, which basically means that the number of patients who are actually getting the medicine reduces further by half. So it's tricky. Here, what artificial intelligence and technologies can do is the concept of digital twins. Now, digital twins in itself means many things, but here in this particular context, what it means is you feed a ton of data about the patients to the system, to the computer, to the artificial intelligence system. And the artificial intelligence system creates a digital twin of each patient with all the biological markers, with all the patient history, with all the disease data, with all the information that it requires to create a digital twin. And now, all the patients that have volunteered get the medicine, and all the digital twins of these patients go into the control group, and it will simulate the effect of a placebo on that patient group, right? Now, it's a little bit of a slip and slide if you really ask me, because how do you know for sure that that digital twin is a digital twin? Is it really a patient or not? But I've looked at some research and it says that it's possible potentially. And this improves the amount of, the turnaround times that you have on studying a particular medicine. But this is not the only scenario. I mean, there are so many use cases when it comes to how artificial intelligence can improve clinical trials. Let's take another scenario, completely fictitious, but, potentially life-changing for pharmaceutical industries. Let's assume that you're trying to study a drug that cures heart ailments, cardiac arrest primarily. You have a particular heart-related disease and you could get a cardiac incident, a heart attack primarily, which could be life-threatening. So there is a drug. If you are getting a cardiac arrest, you take that drug and it will sort of get things under control. Fictitious situation. Now let's say that you have a number of volunteers who have decided that they would like to test out the drug. But considering that these are human beings, you cannot really induce a cardiac arrest in them. That wouldn't be considered ethical or moral. So what you have to do is you have to wait, right? You have to wait for the cardiac incident to happen, and then the patient takes the drug and then test out. You have to collect data about what's happening in their body, how's their blood pressure, diabetes, blood sugar, pulse rate, etc., etc., ECG, EKG, what have you. And then based on that, you'll come to know whether the drug is working or not and whether it's safe or not, right? Which creates a tricky situation because you can't lock the patients up until they actually get a cardiac arrest. That's not possible. So what pharma organizations used to do in the past is they used to give the drug to the patient and say, go home, right? And if you do get a cardiac incident, if you have a heart attack, you take the medicine and then you inform the authorities. And then we will come and we will start tracking the data. But what does end up happening in the real world is that the patient goes home and then at some point in time in the future, they get a heart attack, but they forget to take the medicine because, they're not being informed on a daily basis or what have you. They don't remember and they panic, and then they immediately run to a nearby clinic or they call 911 or what have you. And they have no idea that this particular patient is a part of the study or what have you. They give them whatever medicine is available to them. Nobody's tracking any data. The first job and emergency response, the first job is to save the patient. That's their only job, right? Once the patient is stable, then you can do whatever you want to, right? So all of this is happening, no data is being tracked, extra medicines are coming in, and then somebody at some point in time in the future remembers that, oh, this person is a part of the study. They inform the authorities, they give him the drug. Already there is other drugs in the system. They come in after a while, already a ton of data is lost, and then they start tracking the influence of that medicine. And since there is so much complexity and other interactions, environmental variables that come into play, it takes a very long time to identify and study the safety and the efficacy of that particular drug for cardiac arrest. Imagine that a wearable is given to every patient and they are not asked to inform any authorities. They are just said that if there is a cardiac incident, the wearable is going to ask you to take the medicine. Just take the medicine and stay where you are, right? Let's say that in future an incident happens. When the incident does happen, the wearable alerts the patient that a cardiac incident is in progress, take the medicine. The wearable also informs the right authorities via the internet and GPS location about where the patient is, and the wearable starts tracking data, right? It takes the pulse, it does the EKG, it looks at the blood oxygen levels. In fact, they say that 90% of the parameters of perspiration are similar to blood. So it starts tracking perspiration as well. And now the patient, the authorities are properly informed. They come to the GPS location with an ambulance or what have you, and then they start tracking more detailed data. What this does is it eliminates all the other drug interactions, it eliminates all the other environmental factors, and it tracks much more accurate and much better data, which enables the tracking of the safety and the efficacy of that particular drug. It reduces the amount of time it takes for pharmaceutical companies to come up with a new drug. So there are a number of ways this can be done, and I'm not saying, and these are all fictitious use cases, potential use cases. I'm pretty damn sure that there are pharmaceutical companies out there who are already doing this. If they're not, then they should be doing this, and probably somebody should hire me to come up with such interesting ideas or what have you. My point is that technology has a profound impact on scaling the highest mountain that science has ever seen, which is clinical trials in the pharmaceutical industry, right? Regulatory bodies all around the world, right? Food and Drug Authority, for example, in the United States. Every country has their own regulatory bodies that ensure that the pharmaceutical companies are making sure that patients are safe and the efficacy of the drugs is good, and and all of that. Primarily safety of people. And they work with the pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical companies work with the regulatory bodies. What they do is, let's say, in each phase, right from the beginning, they file a patent as soon as they discover a drug, and then they inform the regulatory bodies that this is what they're working on. The regulatory bodies look at all the data. This is the drug that you have discovered. This is how you discovered it. This is how it's going to work. These are the outcomes that you are expecting, etc., etc. And then based on that, they may or may not give you a go-ahead. If you get a go-ahead, you get into preclinical trials, which is the valley of death, right? And then you do your research, in vitro, in vivo trials, what have you, animal models. After all the research, you send all this data to the regulatory bodies again. Here you inform them that this is how you did the studies. This is the result of the in vitro studies. This is the result of the in vivo studies. These are the animals used. This is the way that you've done research. And so on and so forth, right? And then they look at all this data, and this data could be tons of data, right? In the past, when there were no digital documents, physical documents could be truckloads, so the regulatory bodies had to go through all of this data, and then finally they may or may not give you a go ahead. Like, it's a valley of death, so 90% of the times they would say no, this is no good, or you would say no, it's no good, and then whatever. But you would still have to send all the data. Even if you yourself have decided that this is a failure, you would still have to send all the data to the regulatory bodies. So, and then you get into clinical trials, where again you do all the research and so on and so forth, and you document everything, how you've done the research, what you've done, and then you send it to the regulatory bodies, and then they will look at this, and then they'll tell you, okay, go ahead. This looks like a good cure, and it's safe and it's efficacious, or what have you. And once they give a go ahead, there is go live, which essentially means that your now new medicine is a product. You can start manufacturing at scale, you can start selling it, right? So you have to work with regulatory bodies and stay compliant throughout the entire process. But now we have artificial intelligence, right? It's not, if you think about it from the regulatory body's standpoint, it used to be a lot simpler in the past, because you do the test, you send it out, they look at the test, they look at the results, and they're done. Of course, they have scientists and doctors who are working in this area who are experts in studying documents or what have you. But now you've got artificial intelligence. You've got artificial intelligence systems that look at biological data and tell you what are the molecules that are not going to work, and you only work on those molecules that are going to work. You have artificial intelligence systems that are creating digital twins, they are identifying patients that are, then you've got wearable data and all of this, which basically means that the regulatory bodies need to upskill themselves, right? They need to get to the next level. It's not just the pharma companies that are going to the next level, it's also the regulatory bodies that need to go to the next level. Because to be able to study all those reports and all that data, you need to understand what all of this that they are talking about. Like, for example, if you've created a digital twin, right? How does the regulatory body know what the digital twin is, or whether that digital twin is truly a digital twin or not? Does it have all the data that the patient has, right? How identical is the digital twin with the actual real life patient? So they need to be upgraded. So what the regulatory bodies are now starting to do is that, they don't work with pharmaceutical companies in phases. That, okay, now that you're done a discovery, you send the data. Now that you're done with preclinical trials, send the data. No, they work constantly. Because if you're going to use artificial intelligence systems, you need to inform the regulatory bodies ahead of time that this is how you are using the AI, this is the kind of data that you are submitting it, this is, and so on and so forth. So, regulatory bodies are also becoming more and more proactive, because everything's said and done. Pharma companies and regulatory bodies are both working together to create new drugs to save lives, right? Regulatory bodies are not there so that they can stop pharma companies from making new medicine. That's not why they are there. Their primary purpose is to make sure that the people are getting safe medicine. But ultimately, together, they are working towards better healthcare, right? So very, very interesting field. I've worked in the financial service industry as well, and it has its own complexity and everything, but healthcare and new drug development specifically takes it to the next level. And this is what I always say, technology has a profound impact on everything, right? If you think that your job is a 9-to-5 job, if you go in the morning, come back in the evening, keep waiting for the weekends, and that's how you live your life, then change something, right? Move. Find a job that you are passionate about, or forget passion. Find a job that you find interesting. Find a job that will make you want to wake up every morning and go to the office and work on whatever it is that you're working on. I find this very interesting. These looking at it from a bigger picture view, looking at systems, how they interact with each other, how they enable the business to do bigger things, talking to people like scientists who basically work on new medicines, who do research. It's very interesting for me, and that's why I'm enjoying my work, and getting paid for it. Isn't that fun? All right. So the book that we are going to cover today is called Thinking in Systems by Donella H. Meadows. It's a very old book. It was published in 2008. And I've been reading this book for the last 5 years. That doesn't mean I've been reading it like for 5 years. I've read this book at least 6 or 7 times in the last 5 years. I actually end up reading 40 to 50 books in a year. And usually I am reading 2 or 3 books in parallel. There's one book in Audible and there's one or two in Kindle. And if I start finding these books boring, I'll go back to Thinking in Systems. The book is about systems thinking, and it covers 5 or 6 major concepts. First is interconnected systems. Second is talks. Third is, feedback loops. Fourth is system traps. And then you have leverage points, and then you have time delays or time lapse. We'll talk about that. So one is interconnected systems, right? We have systems within systems and systems connected to systems, systems impacting systems, and so on, right? Like for example, you've got your skeletal system, your muscular system, your circulatory system, your nervous system, your reproductive system, and so on and so forth. But these are not isolated systems. They are all connected to each other, and they together in tandem they function and keep a human body alive. If you look at your organization, right, and if you go deeper, in the muscular system also you'll find cellular structures that form a system. And overall, if you go higher, human beings as a society form a system, right? And then you can go even further higher, that human beings are not the only ones that are living here together. So there's a biological ecosystem where there is bacterium or bacteria, and then you've got other species on the planet who all work together with each other, right? And so on. And you will find all of these systems everywhere. So if you look at your organization, for example, right? Within your organization, you will find systems, systems within systems, systems above systems, systems working with systems, and so on. So systems essentially are interconnected. And then you have stocks, right? So stock is essentially a number of things. You measure stock. If what you measure, what you cannot measure, you cannot improve, or what you do not measure, you cannot improve, right? So you should measure. And then you have change. Change is essentially change in numbers, right? Change in stock. So either things are increasing or things are decreasing. And then the rate of change is also increasing or decreasing. Some rate of change is increasing. Like for example, the rate of change of technology is also increasing exponentially. And then on the other hand, you've got rate of change decreasing also, right? Which ultimately leads to death, right? So she talks about that in detail. And then you've got feedback loops. So you have your reinforcing feedback loops, which are every loop, feeds into the next loop, and not only just feed into it, it reinforces it. It makes it stronger, faster, quicker, right? And then you have balancing feedback loops. Like for example, you use a technology, right? That technology increases the speed at which, let's say, or it improves the turnaround times of a system, right? Which enables us to use another piece of technology, which again improves the turnaround times, this is called a reinforcing feedback loop, right? And then balancing feedback loop would be you use a new system or a new technology, it increases the turnaround time, but you've got compliance and regulatory bodies that reduces the speed, so that is a balancing feedback loop. So you've got feedback loops, and then you have your system traps. System traps essentially means that it is said that people are not the obstacle to progress, systems are. That's one of the things. I mean, people are also at times obstacle, but just say the system is designed in such a way that progress is not possible, or that's called a system trap. When you have a flaw in the system that stops us from making progress, that's called a system trap. Analogy comes to mind. Many years ago, I used to have New Year resolutions, right? And then at some point in time, I decided that resolutions are for losers. I have goals, right? And I used to say this because let's say that I have a New Year resolution that I will exercise every day. The first day that I don't exercise, my resolution is broken, and then I feel mentally down that my resolution is already broken, so why should I exercise, right? Goals, on the other hand, are a little more sustainable, because you could say that I want to, let's say, run 1000 kilometers in this year. Even if I don't run one day, doesn't matter. I can go the next day and catch up, right? Let's say that I want to bench 100 kgs by the end of this year. Even if I don't exercise a week or two, I can always catch up the next week, right? So goals are a little bit more sustaining than New Year resolutions. But even that is not enough. I used to believe that that's enough, but later on I came to realize that you need systems in place to be able to achieve your goals. You can't just have a goal and forget about it. How are you going to achieve a goal? So if you're going to run 1000 kilometers, then you're going to split it across 12 months. And how many kilometers a month are you going to run? And then you add buffer to it. And then you enable yourself by, eating right food at night if you're going to go for a longer run over the weekend, or sleeping on time so that you can wake up early in the morning, and so on and so forth. So you've got to place a system. You've got to prepare, you've got to build a system that enables you to achieve your goal. A system trap is when the system is designed in such a way that no matter how easy your goal is, you will not be able to achieve it. Like, for example, if you drink every night, it's impossible for you to wake up in the morning, or if you stay up late night, or if you work in an industry where you need to, long hours or what have you, it becomes difficult for you to achieve your goal. So that's called a system trap, right? And then you have leverage points. Leverage points is the opposite of system traps, where what are the points in your system where you can intervene to improve your performance or to make it easier for you to achieve your goal. So these things. And then finally, she talks about time lapses, which is the most interesting part of this book, where she talks about cause and effect and the time lapse in the middle. So she takes the example of a distribution system for beer, for example, right? There's a manufacturer, there's a distributor, there's a dealer, and then there are consumers. And this could become actually a very interesting game. So, regular day, everything is fine, everything is working well. Everybody knows the demand forecast, 50 beers over a week or what have you, 100 beers, 500 beers, whatever, over a week. That's what the dealer sells. Dealer tells the distributor, distributor tells the manufacturer, manufacturer makes that much, sends it to the distributor, distributor sends it to the dealer, dealer sells it. There are a few, 5% variance, here and there, but that's okay. And then there's a break, right? There's a, let's say, local pop star who comes in and buys a beer and drinks it. Somebody takes a picture, puts it on social media, and suddenly overnight that beer becomes popular in that particular locality, right? And all the beer is sold over the next day. So now the dealer tells the distributor, I want more beer, right? The distributor sends him some beer, but tells the manufacturer that suddenly the demand has spiked in this locality, I need more beer, right? And then, so there is a certain delay, and then the manufacturer starts manufacturing and there is no stock here now, and then next day the news about that locality spreads to other localities. So while he's increased the amount of beer that is manufactured and sent to the distributor, the demand in other localities has already hiked up. So now what happens is he sends some amount of beer to here, but then this dealer thinks that he needs to probably add some buffer because he did not receive the number of beers that he was expecting to meet the demand. So he hikes up and adds buffer to it. So if he needed 100 beers, he says, I need 200. Everybody does that. It takes a little bit of time for the distributor to tell the dealer. The dealer was already. Now what happens is the trend here fades. And now the stockpile of this particular dealer has increased. So he says, wait, I don't want any more beers. But by this time, the distributor has already ordered for a large number of beers and the manufacturer has already manufactured it. And so on and so forth. Right? It's a very interesting game where the time lapse between the sale and the manufacturing causes supply chain challenges. So very, very interesting book. I've read this book multiple times, but I keep going back to it because it's just fun. I'd strongly recommend it if you are an enterprise architect, or if you are in any form of systems development or systems, or working with systems. Essentially, you need to learn to think in systems, and this book helps a lot. Once again, I would like to remind you that if you're enjoying the videos that I'm making, then please let YouTube know. Do the good stuff, like, share, subscribe, what have you, and comment. I would like to hear what you think about the videos. If you don't like them, feedback would be amazing, how I can improve. Otherwise, once again, I would like to remind you that Enterprise Architecture Radio is less of a podcast and more of a community platform. It would be nice if we could all learn from each other, guide each other, help each other out, but most importantly, have a ton of fun.